We're going to continue what we've been talking about, the nexus of reform and public safety and the role that local institutions and community play in transforming the system. And here for that conversation, please welcome the aforementioned State Representative Kimberly Gardner, who just became the St. Louis Circuit Attorney-elect. Welcome. Michael John Voss, co-founder of Arch City Defenders. And Jamala Rogers. She's a founding member of the Organization for Black Struggle and the author of Ferguson is America. Juleyka Lantigua-Williams is back to lead the conversation.
I am back. Miss me? Hi, everybody. So we just, the four of us just met back there, kind of did a huddle, and we want to sort of continue the conversation that the room started when I was last here, 20 minutes ago. And so I'm gonna ask Jamala to start us off by basically looking at how, she's been a longtime activist, and you guys know more about her than I do, but I wanna hear from her about how the current movement for Black lives, right, as currently manifested, is being filtered through what's going on here in St. Louis. If you would, please.
Okay, I think the biggest way that the changes that I see are happening is not just in people's attitude about being more bodacious, more emboldened, more intolerant, but also that it has manifested itself in some tangible ways. And one of the ones I could think of, just because she's sitting on this stage, and that is the election of Kim Gardner. This is a person that did not have the endorsement of the Police Officers Association and won overwhelmingly, and that's because people are sick and tired of the system that we had in place. So those are the kind of victories that people have been fighting for. That's what 100+ days on Ferguson streets was about. And so, yeah, people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
So now there are tangible results from the changes.
Yeah, and that's going to be a difficult job for her because she's inheriting a corrupt system. We already know that. We've been fighting against it for 40 years. So I think she's going to need support, but we also need to be holding her accountable. So,
of course, I'm going to piggy over to you, but why do you think that your victory, not just personally, but sort of, in the city, in the county, why was it important? And then correlate that to your insistence that hiring more Black prosecutors is necessary.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Jamala for giving me that wonderful, accolades, and let's see how long it lasts, right? But in terms of my election, it was not about me. It was about the message, and the message for change, the message for accountability. As you heard, you talk about the prosecutor's office and what that prosecutor's office has discretion to do. And one of the things I ran on, being a former prosecutor, is that we have to be more accountable to the community in which we serve. We have to be more transparent, open, and let people understand what we can and can't do. So I think that was a beautiful message in terms of my election, because people wanted to see change, because we had, different things going on in the community about, police accountability. And what I ran on, when I said public trust, it was not just about the public trust of law enforcement, it was the whole criminal justice system. And we look at that, we have to understand that we, as public servants, we have to be held accountable. And so that is in sense of even prosecutors inside the office, as well as law enforcement and public officials. So I think that when we look at building trust in the criminal justice system, it's the whole system together. And I think that we have to make sure with this election, we have to educate people, because we have tough issues going forward that I'm going to inherit. But that's regardless of whether I was an African-American prosecutor or not. Those are tough issues that the whole criminal justice system has to change, because people want change. In terms of being diverse in that office, I was one of the rare African-American prosecutors. And I think it's not just having more African-American prosecutors, it's actually prosecutors who believe that we must change and want to push forth that agenda. So we have to look at diversity across, not just gender, racial, but it's the thought process and how we proceed forward.
All right, thank you for that. So, Michael John, you've got a potential reformer here, but you've got a massive lawsuit in your hands. So where is the nexus for these two extremes?
Well, I'd like to frame it a little bit here. So our organization, we brought this lawsuit. We've got a lawsuit against Jennings, against Ferguson, multiple lawsuits, one against St. Anne that targets 13 towns for conspiracy of running debtors' prisons. Why do we bring those cases? It's because of listening to the voices on the street, the people, our clients that we represented, like Kiana, who was on the last panel, hearing her stories and what happened to her. And we needed to do something about that. And so we brought forth these cases against Jennings and Ferguson, and we have won the settlement in Jennings. But I'd like to just put it in a broader context here at this moment, because it took people on the streets for days and days protesting in Ferguson to bring the eye of the DOJ, right? That eye is going to be closed, right? We have Rudy Giuliani possibly as the new DOJ chief. And regardless of the reforms that we have locally here with the Circuit Attorney's Office, the DOJ is not going to be looking anymore, right? It's just going to be up to us to do this work and bring this reform. In fact, you're going to find more resistance from this administration on any of these things. And I just want us to understand where we are in terms of a context, because it's been 48 hours, right? 48 hours, and it is that setback, that 48-hour setback, cancels and negates the 2 years that we've been spending here in St. Louis. It's just, it is, we can make as many steps forward as we can, but we are dealing with a seismic change and step falling backward.
No, I understand that, but to me, listening to it, obviously as an outsider and someone who reports on these things, it seems like you are at once asking for change to be organic and come from within, but having a certain expectation that you need an authoritative body like the DOJ to lead that change. And to me, those two things sound almost incompatible.
No, it's just, what I'm saying is that we're going to be doing it alone now. There's no longer going to be statements of interest by the Department of Justice in support of the work that we're doing in other organizations that are local. I mean, you really need to understand the fact that there is going to be a pushback that we have not seen in criminal justice reform. The idea that it's going forward, we're going to hit a wall. Okay. And there's going to be dramatic changes in the way criminal justice is going to operate in the next 4 years.
Right. No,
I think
I don't disagree.
To talk about, to add on to that, when you talk about looking at authoritative bodies to sort of do that, for years we talked about debtors' prisons. We talked about what was happening to black folks. So when Eric Holder came in and said that black folks were being used like ATMs, we had been saying that all along. Right. But him saying that in the kind of role that he had gave us weight and ability to then come in with the consent decree and some other possible, concessions. But you got to have both. And I think what I hear you saying, MJ, is like that's not going to be there anymore. And I think you're going to see more of street action because folks are just frustrated. But what I'm looking at for us to do is to be able to turn that anger into some real tangible victories for people. And it's going to have to start with the system of police accountability and the courts. Those are the big pieces that affect most black people's lives.
Right.
So then I'd like the three of you to take the question of merging. There's a swinging pendulum in this county. Do we not? Do we do it? Do we not? A couple of cities have actually attempted it. I think there's one pair that has succeeded so far in merging their systems. Is there any real reason to believe that that might be a way forward, or would that just be counterproductive to the progress that has already been made?
So there's three things going on. Some of that is the municipalities, city-county merger. Then some people are advocating for the municipal court merger, and then some people are advocating for the police departments to merge. County, so those are three different levels, and I got opinions about each one of them.
All right, so let's start over there, and we'll come back to you.
I mean, I think that to me, we have to address the issues. I mean, I think that we have to look at. People talk about mergers. That's not for us to decide. That's for the voters in those areas to decide, and that should be up for discussion. But until then, I mean, we can say we can merge, the municipalities, which I've heard people want to do that, and I think it's for them to decide, as well as we merge the police departments. But until we change the organizations and the culture within those organizations, that mindset, even with a merger, will still exist. So I think that we have to look at addressing those issues first before we talk about whether merger is good. Now, municipal court reform is different, like you said. It was funny, as a state rep, the first day I was there, I filed municipal court reform, stopping debtors' prison. I was laughed at about Democrats, Republicans. Everybody was like, it's not happening. There's no such thing. I'm like, are you serious? And it took, like you said, the DOJ and the work of our city defenders to step up when we had this heated moment in Ferguson to even highlight this issue. So there's issues that we can address and we need to work together. But I think in terms of, we have to look at changing the mindset in these organizations.
But as the county attorney, how can you possibly influence police culture?
Well, I think in terms of, a lot of people ask me that. They say, well, how are you going to work with the police when you were not endorsed by the police? And I think that as a prosecutor, it's a relationship that we have to work together. Police, we can't arrest as prosecutors. They arrest and they can't issue cases. So we work hand in hand. But at the same time, we have to work together so we can make the city safer. So I think that it's imperative that we have a good working relationship. But at the same time, we're accountable for prosecuting the laws of the state of Missouri and protecting the citizens of the city of St. Louis. Having that working relationship does not mean that we're a rubber stamp for each other. So I think that it's imperative that as the law enforcement agencies, we work together, but at the same time, we have to hold each other accountable.
All right. I know you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a region in which there's 58 different police departments. We live in a region in which there's 81 municipal courts that can all ticket you for the same. Police departments can ticket you for the same offense in all these different towns for your car, whatever it might be. And then you're going to go to court. 81 courts. There's just too much interaction between an individual and the justice system here, and the way that too much interaction between the police and individuals. You can drive down a stretch of Natural Bridge Road and you can hit 7 towns with a taillight out and get 7 tickets. Yep. And so that sort of multiplicity of courts needs to be consolidated. It needs to be reduced. It needs to be a full professional court, and it needs to be full-time. Right now, these are part-time prosecutors, part-time judges. They're not full-time, right? So they have a financial incentive to how many cases they bring, okay? And that marriage between revenue generation and the administration of justice needs to be divorced. And you can only do that through a consolidation of the court system.
Okay. So Jamala, I asked you in the back about the Citizens Review Board, and if that was a realistic measure for accountability, or at least a tool for accountability.
Oh yeah, we definitely see it as a tool of accountability. I mean, we fought for it for 30 years, so obviously we felt like it was some value there. We don't ever think that it was a panacea for the systemic change, but what we do see it is an actual avenue for everyday citizens to have an independent body that looks at their cases against police, as opposed to going to the internal affairs and thinking that somehow that you're going to get justice there. So that was a piece that was in operations even before Ferguson went up in flames. But I will say that the municipalities, whether they be city, county, the 91 of them plus St. Louis, is that people have to see some immediate change. Some change is going to be slower than others, but when you have a whole system, for example, in Ferguson, where the courts, that means all the employees in there, the judges, that means all the municipal judges, part-time or otherwise, the police department, the mayor, the state attorney general, all of them knew that they were violating the law, that what they were doing was unconstitutional. Some of those folks need to be drugged up out of there and charged with something. And so when people don't see that happening, then nothing else is going to change. Thus, immediate, what were the sanctions against those folks who did that?
So if they're not if there's not going to be charges filed against them, then it's us filing the civil litigation to hold them accountable.
Well,
police
let's ask
cases,
the lady in
malicious
charge.
prosecution case.
Are you going to prosecute police officers?
Yes, I'm going to hold police officers accountable just like I would hold any other person who breaks the laws of the state of Missouri. I mean, we have to do that. And when we talk about accountability, a lot of people look at holding officers accountable for the use of force and when they use this force. But what we have to look at is how we change the culture, that it's the everyday interaction of police officers, how they interact with communities in which they are policing. And so I think that we have to work together to hold the police responsible for how we police, my office responsible for how we prosecute, but we have to have more community engagement, because a lot of times we look at this, the end spectrum is, you know, when someone is shot by a police officer, but it's that day-to-day interaction. And we have to, it's a lot of good police officers, just like there's a lot of good prosecutors. It's a few bad apples, just like there are a few bad apples that we're prosecuting. And so we have to have this real discussion in terms of how, in this trying times, in terms of whether you're, you know, it's like you're pro-police or you anti-police because you say you need to hold police accountable. But I think that we have to be about holding all of us accountable on how we engage the community. And so I think that we have to do something. We have to make sure we have some kind of process, but it's going to be difficult because, you know, the discussion is you're anti-police because you think that if someone does something wrong, breaks the law, regardless of their occupation, they should be held accountable.
I want to read you two really quick quotes. I read through the forward through Ferguson, and the report says, make no mistake, this is about race. We have not moved beyond race. So I understand on a granular level the need to be specific in the changes, but there's clearly a culture of bias, right? How do we address this? Like, and where are tangible things that can actually be done, right? Because we're not talking about individual players. We're not talking about bad apples. We're talking about a very cohesive structural system in which the power dynamic is based on race. So where do we start with that?
Well, for me,
You got 3 minutes.
For me, I think that you have to start with, like, the organization that I'm about to go into. We have to start with having implicit bias training in that office, as well as requiring everyone in the office to engage in community activities, not just as we're prosecuting or giving information, but understand the community in which we are prosecuting so we can help be a part of the community, and I will require that. So that is a start that we have to change some mindsets, because people have, you know, different mindsets sometimes. But I think if we engage each other and we talk to each other and sit down and become familiar, then we will have a different spin on those cases that come across your desk.
Okay.
And just like you have to have training, you also have to have sanctions in place, because I don't care how much some of these folks have been through training. In fact, the person that came out with guns drawn that killed Jimmy Powell had just had mental health training. It did nothing as soon as he saw a black face. So there needs to be some sanctions that if you engage, if a pattern of engagement of this kind of bias, you're not going to get promoted. You're not going to get some more stripes. But in the cases here, at least that I know about, when you do that kind of stuff in a sustained way, you get rewarded. You get promoted. You get all kinds of good stuff. And so why does that happen? That's reinforcing the system that already exists. And so until that kind of stuff happens, until police get prosecuted and actually get prosecuted in jail, not indicted, and then charges drop, but prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, then you're going to see some changes in that culture. Until then, there's really no incentive for them to do better, because doing worse gets them rewards.
Right, and just to piggyback on a point about the Civilian Review Board, I met with investigators on that in that organization, and if you make a complaint to the police department, it goes to the Internal Affairs Department. There's two separate forms right now. You have to also say, I also want it to go to the Civilian Review Board. They don't get notice of it unless you request it specifically of their form. And are the officers doing that? Are they actually letting them know that there's actually two forms here that you're going to have to do? Right now, there's 60 cases that have been filed, right? Of which 20, it's only been, of which 20 have maybe been investigated and dropped. I mean, that is, there are, even with the reforms that we have, there are problems that have been put in place here that we haven't addressed. Okay. And it is a systemic problem, because even though there might be just a few bad apples, as you said, all those people in Ferguson knew what was going on. And that's just one town, all right? That's just one town in our region.
All right, so 20 seconds, get your questions ready.
Can I just say one thing on that too?
Sure.
And even when you talk about notification, the prosecutor's office is not notified of some of these instances. So people think that automatically we're notified by some of the problems that Internal Affairs deals with. So I think that is something I'm looking at in terms of a notification system. And we have to be willing to do that. But they have these 3 different systems and no one is communicating.
Okay, last question. Ferguson effect, yay or no? Is there such a thing? I say no, but I'm, from
well, we
the other side of the world.
redefined it here. It's not what Chief Dotson said, that's going to make all the police intimidated to do their job. We see that didn't happen. 2 weeks after Mike Brown was killed, there was another police killer. So forget that. What I see is the Ferguson effect is that, as I said before, people have become emboldened. They don't take the same kind of that they took prior to August 9th, 2014. It's just a new way of thinking. And so that to me is the Ferguson effect. This sister here being elected with no backup from the police department, that's the Ferguson effect. So there's lots of that going on. And I think when we start to feel and actually consciously and intentionally create the synergy, that we're going to see more impact.
Ferguson effect?
What'd
Yay
she
or
say?
nay? Oh, come
Yeah, it's easy
on.
answer.
You know what people are going to say in the audience? There's another white man riding on the back of a smart black woman. Don't do it. Don't do it. You know you were thinking it.
Oh,
See what you guys do to me? Madam.
I think I don't believe in the Ferguson effect, but I do agree with what Jamala Rogers is saying, is that there's change in the mindset that we have to do something different. We have to push these criminal justice reforms, and this is in the forefront that how our criminal justice system needs to change for the good.
Okay, all right. I know, here we go. First question.
This question is for Kim. It's known that the current circuit attorney of St. Louis, to bring it back to indigency and getting out of jail, that they oppose all bond reductions regardless of circumstances, and that they also have even colluded with judges to have minimum cash-only bonds for certain crimes regardless of circumstance. So I'm wondering how bond is going to look different with your office.
Well, that's a good question, and thanks, Sarah. Well, that's a very complicated question, and that's what happens kind of, I'm not gonna just blame the office, but I think it's when we have issues of crime and how we deal with crime, we have to look at how we, how the courts look at bonds and even the prosecutor's office. So to make it simple, I will look at that structure and how we look at bonds and how we have to look at different factors of whether we, look at circumstances in terms of the type of crime, the background. And I think they're going toward that in that office. So I think there's some change in terms of how we give bonds. And I think that we have to have a discussion with the bench as well as the office to create those policies so we can create fair bonds in certain instances.
Someone else? Right here, please. Thank you.
How you doing? I'm from St. Louis. I know a couple of the folks on the panel. My question to you guys is this. We talked about the Ferguson effect, and a key issue with the Ferguson effect, and I know I've talked to Jamala about this before, is the makeup of the the law enforcement agencies. In Ferguson, it was a the population in Ferguson, racial population in Ferguson, was not represented by the police force in Ferguson. And during the protest, that doesn't seem to ever came up. In the city of St. Louis, the police department does not represent the population of St. Louis. So to me, it seems like there is a diversity issue, and how do you guys feel about that?
I can talk about that a little bit because, when I ran for office and, we have, in the city of St. Louis, we have the Ethical Society Police Department. They have a union that represents black officers as well as the main, the overall police union that represents everyone. And there's a division within the police department, and we have minority representations, but like I tell, anyone, we have to change the mindset because, you could talk about have more diverse police departments, but if that culture of how we interact, engage with the community is still the same, it doesn't matter. And so, that was a question, I talked to some members of the Ethical Society of Police, and I know they have some issues with it in the organization in terms of promotions based off, of race and different things. But I tell, people who ask me how I'm gonna interact with the police department, I tell them, when we talk about that issue, I believe there's an issue, but we have to look at when something goes on, why are you silent? When there is something happening, why are you not letting people know so we can hold people accountable? Because I think we have to change that mindset. So I think we want more diversity, but we want to change that mindset.
All right, please thank them for their wisdom. Thank you for being with us. Everybody have a good day.